Hey everybody, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont State Senate, here tonight with my update on Vermont's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is Tuesday, May 26th. I have to look down and actually remind myself what the date is from time to time because it seems like day after day. It's not always easy to tell when we've crossed one threshold or the other, what's a weekend, what's not. Just a couple quick updates on where Vermont stands right now in our sort of battle with COVID-19. The good news is that our flattening of the curve continues to look pretty good. Despite that, we have had 11 positive tests since Friday. So it is not a situation where the virus has stopped infecting people. The infections were, I believe, in Orleans County, which is where Newport and Derby are, Chittenden County, also Windsor County. So that's the sort of bad news, is that we continue to have the virus spread. As we ease open the economy, we have to continue to be vigilant. I went for a walk to North Beach in Burlington on Saturday, and it was a perfect beach day, and a lot of people took that opportunity to go to the beach. It was quite a scene. There were a lot of people. The gatherings were certainly larger than 10 all across North Beach. Very few people wearing masks, and so I'm not here to be doing citizens arrest, but rather say that it does raise concerns about whether there will be a renewed spread of infections as a result of people letting their guard down a bit. So it's a good reminder for all of us to continue to be vigilant. It doesn't require us to look much further than the state of New Hampshire to know what happens if we do not maintain our vigilance. In New Hampshire, which has a population a little bit more than twice Vermont's, has now had 210 people die of COVID-19, which and Vermont's number is currently at 54. So Vermont is about half the population of New Hampshire, give or take, but 4 times more people have died as a result of COVID-19. Now, admittedly, the heat map, if you will, of where most of the infections in New Hampshire are happening are in the counties that have a large percentage of people who are commuting to the Boston area and northeastern Massachusetts for work and going back and forth. And we know that the Boston area was a major area with an outbreak. So it's not apples to apples comparison, but it does remind us that we have neighbors, and it's not just Vermont's own efforts that need to be judged, but also how we fit into a regional mix. I also want to take a quick moment. We're now at a stage. It's the State House closed the day of the state of emergency declaration, which was March 13th. Restaurants and bars, I believe, were closed on March 16th, and schools were the day before. So there was a whole shutdown sort of mentality in that second or third week of March. We're now 10 weeks or so into this experience. It is certainly true, and I guess is just a feature of life, that increasingly, with every day that passes and with the public health measures we've taken, which have been largely successful, some of that anxiety and fear and panic that we felt in mid-March all the way through April has dissipated a little bit. And the level of gratitude that people both felt and expressed to those who were working in healthcare or first responders and paramedics, people who work in group homes, homeless shelters, people who worked in supermarkets before all the other retail places were open. There was a lot of showering people with praise and thanks and gratitude back then, and I think it's a natural thing that people start to move on. I think we should remind ourselves that they continue to do work that puts them at greater risk of infection, even if the numbers are dropping. And it doesn't diminish what they went through. It's one of the reasons I feel so strongly about passing our hazard pay grant program, which would effectively retroactively provide a very modest grant to those who had to work on the front lines, interacting with lots of people as a part of their job, in recognition of the risk they took, to their own health, what they brought home to their families, and also to correct an imbalance where if the individual had not continued at work but had been able to collect unemployment benefits as a result of being in a qualifying category, they could have actually made more money. So to me, it's really critical that we not move on effectively, both in terms of our assessment of where things are and where they've been. We have to remember that those 2 months or so were no less stressful or anxiety filled for those workers because they've passed now. And so I hope we can go back and remedy that with a show of real monetary support. Bear in mind, the federal government has sent us $1.25 billion, and much of that money is going to go to help small businesses who need it desperately, to help in a number of important ways. But unless we do this hazard pay grant, it means that those people who make very little money but have higher risk jobs and who were required to show up through the worst of the stay-at-home order, that they will be the ones shut out. And I hope we can make sure that doesn't happen. I also want to take a moment to say that the people who work in residential care facilities, group homes, places where a number of people congregate, either because they're older Vermonters, they have particular disabilities, because they're homeless, you name it. We all know and can identify in our own communities facilities that house multiple people, where there are services being delivered, often by licensed medical professionals at different levels on the medical food chain, so to speak. I mention it because we had two very serious outbreaks at facilities in Burlington. Burlington Health and Rehab and Birchwood Terrace both had outbreaks within their walls, and those two outbreaks account for a fairly significant percentage of Vermont's death total as a result of COVID. And while that's obviously two tragic situations, I do want to make a quick comment about what it means that there were just two. We have hundreds of facilities throughout the state, whether they're independent living with some staff presence or assisted living, which have very heavy staff presence, our homeless shelters, all the settings where people are congregating for housing purposes and to have their needs met. That we only had two outbreaks at this point is a real credit to all the people who do that work. The news, Memorial Day, which was obviously yesterday, was a time to think a little bit about not just honoring those who lost their lives serving our nation, but also the people who come back and have various challenges that we need to support them with, whether it's someone who fought in World War II, who are in their later years, or someone who's just come back from Afghanistan or Iraq or one of the other places around the world where many people right now, sight unseen, are serving our country. And in Massachusetts, there's the Holyoke Soldiers Home, which the Vermont equivalent would be the Vermont Veterans Home. They had 74 people die. 74. They had another something like 84 staff tested positive, and they had more than 70 other veteran residents who tested positive but have recovered. Now, I don't know all the facts of what went on in Massachusetts at the Holyoke Soldiers Home, although I do know that many of these people fought in World War II. Some of them had liberated concentration camps. Others had Bronze Stars, Medals of Honor. I mean, these are people who have been through a lot. And the fact that this is just one of many examples all through the country of nursing homes and veterans homes and other care facilities that had massive outbreaks shines a light on what an amazing job the people in our Vermont facilities have done, because we have not seen, other than the two instances I described, the kind of outbreaks we have seen in other states. And having a loved one who has been in one of these facilities, I can tell you that it is not luck. It is the result of conscientious careful work by dedicated staff who don't get rich at their jobs. And I hope that we can all take a moment to continue to recognize what they've done and not forget about it just because the weather is nice and people are ready to start moving on and reclaiming some sense of normalcy. So lastly, I would like to say that we are now entering this phase of recovery, particularly on the economic front. And it's an interesting quandary to have a $1.25 billion check from the federal government with not a lot of guidance about how it can be spent. The governor, in a previous update, I walked through the governor's proposed first phase economic recovery package, and there's certainly much that I like about it, and we'll work closely with the governor and with the speaker to start getting Vermont's economy on the right track. There are some things that were not in that package, and I want to talk to you just briefly about what I hope we will see moving forward. And these are often, almost everything I'm about to list are things that many of you contacted me saying, hey, we're going to use this federal money to address the COVID crisis and help us position favorably moving forward. These are the kinds of things I want to see investment in. So you told me those things, and this largely list I'm about to give, which is very basic, largely reflects the feedback I've received from you. I welcome you to go to the legislative website tomorrow morning at 8:30, and you will see a link for what's called an all Senate caucus. You will basically get a YouTube link. You'll watch all 30 senators talking about a few different bills, but also talking about how we think these federal dollars should be prioritized to best position Vermont moving forward. And I'm going to touch on 5 of the things that we're going to bring to the discussion tomorrow that we really hope to get to the finish line working with the governor and the speaker. The first is addressing homelessness with a significant boost of funds for housing, especially through the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, which has done amazing work over the 30 plus years of its existence. Right now, there have been many hundreds of people who are homeless. I believe the number was 1,600 was kind of the number for most of this last couple months, who were in motels or hotels because that was the safest place to isolate them instead of being in close quarters where they might spread infection easily. The vision that we have is to buy some distressed properties and renovate them and have people who have been homeless have a safe transitional housing unit with services being offered so that people can regroup and get their lives back on track towards self-sufficiency. So it is an opportunity that will come out of COVID-19's impact on us, but something that we're very determined to see happen. Broadband investments appear in the governor's proposal, though we want to go much bigger in terms of the outlay of spending. I've mentioned in previous updates why the expansion of broadband is so important. One, with distance learning for kids who are not at their schools right now. Obviously, some kids in some communities can't access the internet from home, huge problem. Telehealth and telemedicine, if you can't access internet at home or have the kind of speeds to do video like this, then that's obviously a problem and puts you at greater health risk. Also, working from home. Vermont is actually well positioned to be an attractive place for people throughout the Northeast in particular who might want to live in a safe place that manages its affairs well, but many of our more rural communities who could desperately use an infusion of new faces still struggle with internet. I'm going to say a quick word about why we are where we are. When I first got to the Senate, Governor Douglas had promised that we were going to have effectively 100% broadband across the state and self-service. Well, that didn't happen. Governor Shumlin became governor, said basically the same thing. We received, when I say we, a company called VTEL, which is out of the Springfield area in Vermont, received a grant during the federal stimulus program after the Great Recession of about $130 million. And they signed a performance contract basically with the federal government that said if they were given this money, they would provide wireless, high-quality broadband to every unserved Vermonter, every one of them. So many of us were very, very excited when this grant came in. And we heard, great fanfare from the CEO of the company, and we were all excited because this was going to provide the resources that had not been available in Vermont to make this happen. Well, that was a pretty serious failure, that program. And the fallout from it is that the federal government said, we've already given Vermont money to solve the problem of underserved or unserved people who don't have internet. We are not giving you more. So for the last 8 to 10 years, Vermont has not had the kind of opportunity that other states have to draw federal funds for broadband until now, which is one of the reasons we want to use this money to help support a build out of more broadband. What some people call the creative economy, I still have an old-fashioned term. I call it the arts, but whatever you want to call it, museums, arts organizations, artists themselves. There is a sort of indirect program in the governor's proposal, which is about trying to utilize cultural inclusion into some of the economic projects in downtowns and village centers. What we envision is a much larger investment in our cultural organizations, our museums, and in direct grants to artists, so that in the coming 6 months or a year, we will have a cultural story to tell when we get through this that has kind of reminded us why we want to stay alive in the first place, to enjoy all of the things that enrich us through all the different art forms. So this hopefully will be able to get done, and it'll be great news for all of the artists right now who are struggling because they've seen their commissions or work dry up. Their classes aren't being run in person, and it's not monetarily working to do it remotely. So that's an area we have a lot of hope. Strengthening local purchasing of local agriculture, absolutely critical and a great opportunity right now. The governor's proposal focuses $50 million on dairy farms. And while we have to help dairy farms through this, especially as they're making investments to improve their performance on water quality, the ones that are causing issues right now, all of the other Vermont farms who have been struggling as well need to be a part of this recovery. And what we envision is trying to use these federal funds for purchasing of local food products so that it creates the kind of circular flow of funds for when the COVID-19 crisis is over, strengthening the relationship between buyers and the producers in ways that haven't been done before. And then finally, working to create some kind of expansion of our youth employment efforts. This is something personally very important to me. We have too many young people who already struggle to move forward in the workplace or move on to higher education. COVID-19 has been particularly damaging to younger people and their participation in the workforce. So we believe that this is a great moment to create some Vermont 2020 version of the Civilian Conservation Corps, which you can remember from the Works Progress Administration and all the New Deal programs to get out of the Great Depression. Resource, which is used to be Youth Build, Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, Vermont Works for Women. We have organizations that do this kind of work. They are already scaled up, and we can provide a great number of opportunities for people this fall and the late summer to do public spirited projects all throughout this Vermont, every corner of the state. So we really hope to see progress there. So again, if you want to hear the beginning of this discussion as we start to develop our sort of response to the governor's proposal and how we're going to work with him, but also bring our own priorities to the table, at 8:30 tomorrow morning, if you go to the legislative website, you will see a link to an all Senate caucus at 8:30, and that'll take you to a live YouTube link so you can watch us talking in real time. So with that, I want to thank you for checking in. We'll be back tomorrow with another update. I hope you continue to stay safe.